Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see everybody again. And, you know, I think this conversation is timely. It feels really, really important to me. In the last week or so, I have had a myriad of emails come through to me. Some of them, you know, as direct as the sound of my husband breathing makes me want to put a pillow over his face and press it, to things like, I am so infuriated by seeing the people who are not respecting the social distancing rules and so on, raging about what they see out there. I've seen videos of people who have been insulted in stores for daring to ask somebody to put on gloves. There's so much rage right now. And in many ways, rage, and you should know this, is a natural, well, actually not rage, anger is a natural form of the human condition. In fact, so much so that the very, very first murder on record in Genesis, Bereshit, in our Torah, is the murder of Cain killing his brother. Why? Because he felt slighted and missed, passed over and angry, depressed and downcast about that which had happened to him. And his response was a violent one. And so this should teach us, because the first chapters of our Bible, they are like a family history. They're like a breakdown of what the human being is capable of. We were capable of fratricide. One killed his brother because he was angry at having been slighted. So it's part of the human condition. But the Jewish way is not to say, well, this is the way I am, this is how I was created, because Judaism is not about resting on the nature versus nurture argument. Judaism is about elevating our character traits so that we might live a life that can be considered holy. And we have the Torah to give us the roadmap to that. So we just finished the holiday of Passover. And while I know there are many, many themes in the Passover season, we talk a lot about freedom. And in fact, I'm going to mention that briefly and talked about it a few weeks ago with you. There is a particular thing that I find really salient right now, and that is the plagues, and not just because we happen to be living through a plague right now. The issue that I want to talk about was the second plague. Now, some of you will remember from dipping your finger down, right? When you're bringing those out, the second plague was the plague of frogs. And the way I learned it in Hebrew school, or what we used to call Jew jail, was that the frogs came out of the Nile River and they took over the entire land. They were swarming and jumping in the cooking pots and in the bread dough. They were in their pajamas. In fact, I remember wearing a pair of pajamas to Hebrew school where I had all these frogs cut out and, you know, pasted all over them. That was the way we were going to do the plague. Excuse me, is to show people they were everywhere, climbing out of our sleeves, in our beds, everywhere. But our sages teach us something. And that's why I wanted to share this Passover wisdom as we move forward, so that you can have a visual in your mind. Each one of the plagues also had its own particular meta message, significance. And this one, even more powerful than most, because our sages teach us that it was not thousands of frogs that came out of the water. It was one frog only, one big frog. And in the anger of the Egyptians dealing with these plagues, confounded and irritated by what was going on in their lives, much like we are these days, they took a stick and they banged that frog. And when they banged that frog, our sages tell us, it split into two. And then they banged it again, and it split into 4. And then again into 8. And then again, 16. And if you ask me to count any further than that, I'm going to have to cry. Okay, 64. They kept banging it, and they kept banging it, and it kept growing and growing and growing. So our sages ask us, how stupid could they have been? If you can clearly see that hitting something only increases it, why did we keep doing it? And the answer we learn is that as the human condition is concerned, when we're angry, and anger is natural, but when we act out in anger, when we rage in anger, it is as though we lose our minds. We are lost to ourselves. And in fact, and this is a mystical thought, and this is something that stays in my mind every time I'm about to lose it, is that it's as though the soul, the neshama of a person cannot tolerate living inside of a raging body. And so it leaves you, and it leaves a portal, an emptiness for evil spirits to come in. This is the image that I think of when I start to get angry. I imagine myself banging that frog because every time you scream back at a person, every time you take the bait or fish hook that drags you when your kid or your spouse or your friend or your boss says something that makes you want to mouth off back, that makes you want to respond in rage back, you are only multiplying the situation. So I'm going to ask Allison if she could put up the first slide for me, because I want you to kind of cement this as a key takeaway for you after this. Responding in anger doubles, triples, quadruples anger rather than diffusing it. And it feels like a natural reaction at the time. You know, it's like the Travis Bickle from what was that movie, you know, Taxi Driver, you talking to me? You talking to me? You know why? That me is your ego. And anger is the ego's response to being slighted in some way or another. In 12-step programs, they call ego EGO, edging God out. Why? Because we cease to believe that this world is being run by a power greater than ourselves, and we bow down to our own version of how things should be. And when they are not, it makes us angry. Anger and ego and arrogance ride together in the wagon. Anger is self-destructive. Okay, Allison, the second slide, if you wouldn't mind. So there is a fundamental quote that I discussed when we talked about Pesach a couple of months back that guides me around anger, around any particular kind of character development that I'm working on. And as probably comes as no surprise to any of you, I was born with a quick temper. Now remember, the Torah doesn't say, stay away from anger, don't be angry. It says, be slow to anger. Why? Because it's natural to feel angered. Anger is normal. It is the acting out and the demand that we be slow to anger. You know, people have often asked me, well, why isn't it one of the formal commandments, one of the 613 former connectors that we use to become holy, to become great? And the answer is, in many ways, because dealing with your anger and your ego is the foundation of the entire pursuit of holiness. An angry person, it's as though their soul leaves them. I said to you earlier, there's nothing there. You're an empty shell that anything can enter into. And if you have ever, like me, lost your mind, and I mean lost your mind so your head was turning on your neck like in The Exorcist and you were raging, you know that there's a reason we call it losing it. Therefore, here is the Viktor Frankl quote, the most famous quote from Frankl about freedom. And this is what I use as the beginning format for dealing with the anger impulse when I feel it, so that I don't act on it, so that I don't rage. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is your power to choose your response. And yes, you do have a power to choose your response. So forget it with the, I couldn't help it. He tipped me over the edge. It was way too much. I lost my mind. We are human beings, not animals. And as hard as it may be, we do have the choice to lengthen the space between stimulus and response. And as he says, in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So technically speaking, the second takeaway for you is to remember that while the anger impulse is natural, and while sometimes it's even deserved, your job is to ensure that you stay far from the behavior of anger. And in doing so, lengthen the space between being hit and slapping back or not. That is within all our control. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, says, be slow to anger and easy to pacify. Doesn't say never get angry. It says be slow to anger. So again, to reinforce the first principle, remember, and this is a key takeaway, that reacting in anger, getting the last word, saying something. And I used to be so manipulative with my anger that if I couldn't get the final word in, I would kind of orchestrate a situation so that later I would find the time to say that nasty passive aggressive thing that I really needed to say to get the rust out of my pipes. I have worked for 22 years on this trait, and I have had some not complete success, but certainly long beyond where I was before. It reminds me of an old joke around this getting slow to anger and lengthening the space in it, as we said before, and also understanding that, you know, we have a job to do in terms of creating some barrier between the feeling and the acting out. So I saw this cartoon once in the New Yorker many years ago. There's an older woman, an older man. Actually, when I think about it, they were probably my age, sitting on a park bench somewhere. And that man turns to his wife and he says, "How is it that when I get angry at you, and I get mighty angry at you, how is it that you never react in anger? What do you do?" And she says, "Well, that's simple. I just go and I clean the toilets." And he said, "Well, what good does that do?" And she said, "I use your toothbrush." So there are passive aggressive ways to act out in anger as well. So I'm not suggesting that anybody use their spouse's or their child's toothbrush to clean the toilet. But what I am saying is there's something very profound and cognitively intelligent about leaving the scenario you're in when you feel that first flush of anger. Another tip that you can use: carry a little index card or a little pad of paper with you. The minute you feel that anger, open up the pad and put a little tick, a tick. Why? Well, it sounds like a very simple thing, but any physical movement you do, whether it's washing your hands, whether it's taking a shower, whether it's cleaning the toilets, not with this toothbrush, whether it is going for a walk, whether it is locking yourself in the bathroom in these quarantine times, whatever it is that puts distance and space between what you want to say and how you might act and how you felt, is cognitively slowing down the entire flow of adrenaline that's running through your body, the heat. So if we can have the next slide. The Talmud teaches us this: when a person gives into anger, if he is wise, his prophecy leaves him. If he's a prophet, his power to prophesize leaves him. If greatness was decreed for him from heaven, anger will cause him to be degraded. These are very heavy statements that we're learning. That anger, not the feeling, but the acting on it, is a big deal in this lifetime that we're meant to be working on. And while all of us have different temperaments, it seems that around anger, a lot of ink is spilled. So let's have the next slide, if we can. The Ramban, Nachmanides, the famous commentator, wrote a very famous letter to his son, talking to him about the wisdom of how to be a decent human being. And the first line of the letter said the following: "And one day, please God, we will study that letter from beginning to end, because this reinforces the takeaway of creating a space of some sort or some cognitive shift that will enable us to feel the feeling and not act out on it." So don't beat yourself up if anger is a response for you. It is for me. In fact, many people who have fiery tempers, who are quick to heat up, these are the same people who can use that spark, that flame, to fight injustice. In fact, even the Torah teaches us that certain people are born under the red planet of Mars, that they are considered fiery. They come out that way. And what's interesting is that two different leaders, or figures, if you will, in the Torah, both were considered to be born under that sign. One was King David. And King David took all that passion and all that fire and all that red energy from the planet, and he turned it into something productive and useful whether it was war to fight for the land and for our people, whatever it was, versus the other one who was Esau. Esau, if you recall, is Jacob's brother. And he was the one who used that flaming red temperament to become a murderer, a hunter, a man of the fields. So the Ramban says, habituate yourself always. Now remember, there are no extraneous words in Judaism, none. Every single one of these words has significance. Habituate yourself always to speak all of your words in a low voice to all people and at all times. In this way, you will be saved from anger. And I'm going to share something with you, a great anger hack tip. Starting to speak in a soft voice at all times is one of the greatest tips for controlling raging. It doesn't necessarily control the feeling of anger, but it is useful. Now, I used to have these things I used to say to my kids when I was about to lose my mind. One of them was I'd go, run, run, which meant I was going to blow, which wasn't very productive, but I did say it. You can ask them. And the other thing was I would have a series of statements that I call brain dead phrases. If we can have the next slide, please, that would help me deal with this. And this would fall under this heading: reaction, cognitive restructuring, changing environment, distancing, problem solving, and humor. So reaction, we understand, is the notion that we must extend the space between the stimulus and response. It is also the cognitive restructuring where we say to ourselves cognitively, this is not about my ego. This is not about me. God runs this world, not me. If this happened to me, for me, in front of me, in some ways, it's for me. And I don't know what to do with it, but I do know this: I'm not supposed to rage from it. In fact, I should imagine myself hitting the frog and it doubling and quadrupling and however you say 8 times it, and so on and so on. If I imagine cognitively that frog being hit, or I imagine my soul zooming from my head, out of my head, and a portal being opened so that the evil in the world can enter it, this helps. We can talk about changing environment, leaving the room, cleaning the toilets, but not with his toothbrush. Distancing, which is hard in this time that we're living in, but it can be done. That's why closets and bathrooms have doors on it. Problem solving, humor, all kinds of those things. But what I want to suggest right now is something that I call, under cognitive restructuring, brain dead phrases. Those are phrases that come to your mind that you can say when you're about to blow, that put everyone else on guard, that you're not going any further with this, but it will be dealt with later. The first one I find is the most effective. I say, whoa, I am feeling really triggered right now. I'm feeling so triggered at this moment. It's probably not a good time for me to speak. So I'm just going to remove myself from the situation, and as soon as I calm down, I'll come in and discuss it with you. First of all, it models for your children maturity. It gives you language to lengthen the space between your stimulus and response. It shows self-awareness. Everybody feels anger or triggered. And if you can do nothing more than in a low voice say, whoa, I'm feeling really triggered right now. This is likely not a good time for me to be responding. So I'm going to distance myself for a little bit. And as soon as I calm myself down, we will speak. The second phrase that I use a lot, it's especially effective with a spouse or with children. When somebody speaks to you in a way that makes you really angry and makes you feel like you want to hit that frog back and make things worse, here is a phrase that shuts the whole thing down. It's also followed by walking away. This is what I say. And by the way, I remember paying $195 to my therapist for this line, so I'm giving you this for free. This is what she said. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't let you speak to me that way. It's not good for you, and it's not good for me. I will repeat. Oof. Sorry, I can't let you speak to me that way. It's not good for you, and it's not good for me. What's the meta message there? If it's a child, it's not good to allow your child to speak disrespectfully for you and to you. It goes against the fifth commandment of honoring your parents. You're not allowed to raise your voice or speak disrespectfully to your parents. So essentially what you're saying is, I'm putting a stop to this. There's a boundary around this, but you're also saying, and I'm protecting you from yourself. I'm protecting myself from disrespect, and I'm protecting you from disrespecting your fellow. So, do we have one more slide? Or that might have been the last one. I can't remember. End of slideshow. Okay. I want to tell you a little bit about, and should I stop for a minute and see if we have any questions? Does anybody have anything they want to ask? Irma wants me to say it again. Okay, that great line. I love this line so much. I say oh because that's just the way my vernacular is. But essentially what I say is, you kind of make a gesture. You nod your head, or you hold up your hand, but not in an angry way, in a kind of internal way. And you say the following. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't allow you to speak to me that way because it's not good for you and it's not good for me. Not it's not good for our relationship. Not it's not good for a child to speak that way to a parent. Just simply, it's not good for you and it's not good for me. Now, if they're like me, they'll chase you around the house going, what do you mean by that? What do you mean it's not good for you? It's very good for you. It's very good for me to say the things I need to say, and I'm sick of not having me able to say. You just continue that brain dead expression. This isn't good for me. It's not good for you, and it's not good for me. Now I'm going to separate myself, and then you can go into the second phase because I'm feeling very triggered. And when you're feeling triggered, it's not a time to speak. And unfortunately, once in my early years, I chased my husband around the house when he tried to walk away from me when I was losing it, and I ripped his t-shirt off his back. That is how much I have struggled with anger in my life. But today, because of these tips and tools, I have accomplished like climbing a mountain. I can cognitively switch my mind. I can say, between stimulus and space, there's a response, there's a space to choose my response. God told us we were blessed with free choice. I am not a slave to my emotions. I can learn that my ego is the one that's reacting when I'm feeling rage, as though I've been slighted, and understand that it caused the first murder, which was a fratricide in our family history. That's how dangerous rage is. The third thing is that, it's not so much the anger that is the shame. It's the acting out in anger that leads to sin. And that is why we learn, as Beauty and the Beast taught us, you must learn to control your temper. It was one of my favorite parts in that movie. I find this powerful. Second, distance yourself, do another activity, deep breathe from your diaphragm if necessary, lift it up all the way down from your stomach, not from your throat, in breathing. Washing your hands, do the dishes, scrub the bathtub, clean the toilet, and don't forget what I said about the toothbrush, right? None of that. Physically do something else. There was a famous rabbi, Rabbi Yitzchak Averka, who, when he had to get angry at his students, and there is a time where you can show anger, but it has to be an anger that is for the purpose of education, of chinuch, of educating, for example, children, but you can't mean it. You show anger, but anger doesn't own you. So what he used to do is he would go to the back of the classroom and he'd pick up his jacket, a new jacket. He'd take off his old one, he'd put on the new one, and it had many buttons. And by the time he buttoned up the entire jacket, he would go back to the front of the class to address in anger, an anger that he had already made a space between, cognitively shifted, created a physical difference, calmed himself down to the point where he was acting anger, not acting out in anger. And that is the difference. If you have a child who is prone to anger, it's okay. I managed to do okay in life. Okay, I ripped a few t-shirts, but I'm telling you right now, when I took on this job, I'm learning to deal with this raging. I understood the famous statement that says, the loudest sound in the universe is the sound of a human being changing one negative character trait. I have worked hard, hard, hard. And as I said, it's not perfect, but nobody's asking you to be perfect. It says, not don't be angry. It says, distance yourself from anger. My blessing to all of us through these trying times is that you do precisely that by using these phrases, these takeaways. Take action. Choose one or two of these tips and move forward this week in an attempt to keep your soul safe and serene. So thank you so much. Over to you, Judy.
Thank you so much. I saw that Jackson, your son, wanted to know if his toothbrushes are safe now.
Oh, no, he did not. He did not.
You know, even though it's 12:30, we have had a lot of questions come in, and for anyone that does need to get off, we completely understand. But I think it's important for you to answer maybe one, or if not two. Someone did talk about this and asked this question. Normally, we would take a time out and leave the house and take a break by ourselves, but it's not an option right now. What else can we do when we are essentially in a pressure cooker all day? We don't have this physical space to be alone. She says, I love my kids and my husband, but all day with them and no breaks from them is making me nuts.
Well, sure. Well, sure. First of all,
what can we do?
Well, you know, is your husband, if her husband is at home with her during the day, you guys need to sort out separate walking periods where you can go and walk around the block. I mean, for me, all I've eaten for the last 3 days are, you know, donuts and chocolate covered almonds. And if I don't walk, you're going to have to roll me out of this house. I have two things I do. For me, the distancing is the bathtub. I have poured gallons of oil and essential oils into a bathtub. Even if I get in for 5 minutes and then put on lotion afterwards, for some reason, the immersion in water really helps me. If you have small children and they're freaking out, you can lock them in the bathroom with you and take your bath or take your shower and ignore them during that time, knowing that you can see them. Just don't let them use your toothbrush in the toilet. There is deals that you can make with your spouse. And if you're at home alone, which many people are dealing with all of that, this is as good a time as any to create what our parents used to call a playpen. It is a psychological playpen where you understand it is not your job to entertain your children all day long, to keep them stimulated, to make sure that they are always entertained. That's not your job. A little benign neglect these days will keep people safe and alive. I think that we as a generation really came to believe that it was our job to be their playmate, their best friend, and all of those things. My mother used to dump me in a playpen. I can still feel the bars and the lead paint that was chipping. I wonder if she was trying to get rid of me. I don't know. All I can say is that you need to know that it is not your job during this time, no matter what their age is. A little healthy boredom is where creativity comes from. It's also where introverts thrive. Under function. That is my word for the week. Under function. Don't overfunction. Surely, even if you take 5 minutes on every hour, from 9 till 9:05, I'm in the bathroom. From 9:05 to 9:10, or from 10 to 10:05, I'm in the bathroom. Pretend you have a stomach ache. That's how I used to read a book. Lock yourself in the bathroom. Put lotion on your hands. I know this sounds really cheesy, but man, I used to do it 25 years ago. And if my son is still on this call making fun of the toothbrush, I never used yours, but I did lock myself in the bathroom with a stomach ache. I was really reading. So what?